Russian President Vladimir Putin said there could be an end to the war in Ukraine if Kyiv agreed to certain demands.
Pope Francis joins world leaders on the second day of the G7 summit. Nigel Farage's Reform Party gains traction among former Conservative voters.
Russian President Vladimir Putin said a ceasefire could be brokered with Ukraine if Kyiv renounces its plans to join NATO and withdraws troops from areas annexed by Moscow.
Украинские войска должны быть полностью выведены из Донецкой, Луганской народных республик, Херсонской и Запорожской областей. Причем, обращаю внимание, именно со всей территории этих регионов в пределах их административных границ, которые существовали на момент их вхождения в Украину. Как только в Киеве заявят о том, что готовы к такому решению и начнут реальный вывод войск из этих регионов, а также официально уведомят об отказе от планов вступления в НАТО, с нашей стороны незамедлительно, буквально в ту же минуту, последует приказ прекратить огонь и начать переговоры.
Putin delivered the comments during a speech at the Russian Foreign Ministry in Moscow. Ukrainian and NATO officials have rejected the proposal, saying it is not a real offer for peace.
Pope Francis was welcomed by Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni in southern Italy, where the annual G7 summit is taking place. In a first for the Pope, Francis will address the leaders of the G7. He is expected to call for more safeguards on AI, following a boom in generative artificial intelligence. The second day of the summit was devoted to Africa, China and AI. Right-wing leader Giorgia Meloni is known for her hardline stance on migration and is keen to increase investment and funding for African nations in order to reduce migration pressure on Europe. At the opening of the summit, the leaders also announced a $50 billion loan to Ukraine and an agreement on the use of frozen Russian assets to help Kyiv. The summit hosts leaders of leading industrialized nations and will last 3 days in the Italian region of Puglia.
Hundreds of Cubans and tourists lined up to board a Russian warship on Thursday. The ship was part of a fleet that carried out military maneuvers in the Atlantic. Cuban and Russian authorities agreed to allow citizens access to the flagship, which arrived the day before, accompanied by a nuclear-powered submarine. Children, women and men of all ages awaited their turn.
Siempre he sido amante de todas estas cosas, me gusta ver los desfiles militares, todos esos acontecimientos, me gusta verlo y me gusta estar bien informado.
The chance to board ships of different nationalities arriving in the Bay of Havana is quite usual.
Es una visita nomás. No creo que es una amenaza para los Estados Unidos.
As for the Russian fleet, Cuban authorities confirmed that it will be docked in Havana until June the 17th. US officials downplayed the danger of the visit but said they would closely follow every move of the Russian military vessels.
Like many English coastal communities, Skegness is a seaside resort where the economy continues to struggle.
Yellow 2 and 7, 27.
Immigration remains a key issue, but many are now turning to the Labour Party for answers, while others shift further right.
It's day one, Saturday. Ground campaign begins today.
Nigel Farage's Reform Party is gaining traction among former Conservative voters.
It's time we looked after our own, instead of letting other people come to live on us.
And so you'll be voting for Reform?
Yes, I definitely will.
I think that Reform will take a lot of votes off the Tories, which will probably result in a Labour victory.
And how will you be voting?
Conservative.
In terms of Nigel Farage, does he appeal to you at all?
Mr Farage, I think he's a bit of a, I don't know.
He's a clown.
A clown? I think he's just, oh yes, there's a bit of bravado with him. I beat my chest and, and stuff like that.
Skegness is a typical eastern coastal community and it mirrors a trend across England's coastline. Once 77% Tory at the last election, it's now leaning Labour. Right-wingers here are handing the seat to Labour by splitting the vote between the Conservatives and Nigel Farage's Reform Party. The most recent poll shows Labour at 45%, the Tories at 22% and Reform at 13%. So is this likely to push the Conservative Party further right beyond the general election?
The future could rest on the success of a now likely Labour government.
When economies don't do very well, it becomes really tempting to make lump sum blame or to find a scapegoat.
Dr. Veronica Lamarche is a social psychologist at the University of Essex who studied British right-wing populism.
I think Nigel Farage can present a really simplistic picture of what the future of Britain could look like. Fundamental to Reform's ideology, people coming into the UK and blaming them for all of the troubles that we see in the country at the moment.
Red Doctor's Orders number 9.
A vote for the Reform Party could give Labour an enormous majority in early July. How the Conservative Party reacts is something Nigel Farage
Never say die.
is already second-guessing. Luke Hanrahan, Euronews, Skegness.
Yemen's Houthi rebels have claimed responsibility for missile attacks on 3 ships in the Arabian and Red Seas. The attacks were carried out using ballistic missiles and drones and all successfully hit their targets. A spokesperson for the group said the first attack in the Arabian Sea caused the ship to catch fire. The Houthis launched attacks on Red Sea shipping they believe is linked to Israel in November in solidarity with Palestine. A fire has broken out in the Brugg cargo freight zone at Brussels Airport. Firefighters say the blaze started at around 4 p.m. local time. The cause of the fire and what was in the building where it started are still unknown. People living near the airport have been advised to remain indoors and keep their windows closed. But officials said it hadn't affected airport operations and passenger flights were departing and arriving normally. Spain's civil guard says it smashed one of Europe's biggest cocaine smuggling rings. Agents working on information from forces across Europe and South America launched a sting on Wednesday, seizing houses, cash and making several arrests. According to Europol, the arrests have disrupted a network behind a multi-ton cocaine trafficking operation from South America to the EU. The suspects reportedly exploited maritime shipping routes through hubs in West Africa and the Canary Islands.
The pilgrimage to Mecca, which every Muslim must perform at least once in their life as long as they have the physical and financial abilities to do so, began this Friday in Saudi Arabia. One of the 5 pillars of Islam, the Hajj is one of the largest religious gatherings in the world, this year overshadowed by the war in Gaza. But it is also a thriving economic opportunity in Saudi Arabia. Hotels, restaurants and shops around the Great Mosque are full.
حركة تجارية تكون ممتازة ويكون الأسواق ممتازة ويكون الحجاج يعني يتقضوا هدايا من مكان مكرمة من أطهر بقاع الأرض فهم يشتروها من هنا عشان البركة.
More than 1.5 million pilgrims had arrived in the country on Tuesday. This year, the pilgrimage is expected to bring between 10 and 15 million euro to the country.
A street in The Hague has been painted orange as fans prepare for a month of football with the 2024 Euros. Marktweg is one of several streets in the Netherlands that get an all-encompassing orange facelift during European Championships and World Cups. A team of 10 volunteers spent 2 months painting the neighbourhood. The Netherlands national team is known as Oranje, the name of the Dutch royal family and the colour of their strips. The Tartan Army is out in force in Munich as Scotland faces Germany in the opening match of the 2024 Euros. It's the start of a month of football that will take place in 10 cities across Germany. Head coach Steve Clarke said he was confident his side would deliver the goods as Scotland looks to qualify for the knockout stages of a major tournament for the first time.
We believe we can get a result every time we go to the pitch, otherwise what's the point of going to the pitch? So we've prepared well, we think we're ready, and hopefully you see that tomorrow night.
Scotland showed during the qualifying campaign it can surprise, beating Spain and Norway. But they've only won one of their last 13 matches against Germany, and that was more than 25 years ago, 1-0 in a friendly in 1999. Things were more muted in the Germany camp, possibly due to a series of recent defeats. Germany went out at the group stages of both the previous World Cups and were eliminated by England at Euro 2020.
Ich glaube schon, dass sie sehr unangenehm sein werden, aber auch spielerisch gut mithalten werden. Und dementsprechend gilt es definitiv, die Schotten nicht zu unterschätzen. Also ich habe großen Respekt vor ihnen, aber wir wissen natürlich auch, was wir können, dass wir extrem viele Qualitäten haben. Und wenn wir es schaffen, an unser Potenzial ranzukommen, dann bin ich sehr selbstbewusst auch zu sagen, dass wir das Spiel morgen gewinnen müssen.
And someone else who's confident of a win for the German side is Booby, an African elephant who lives in a reserve in Thuringia. She hoofed a ball upfield into a goal marked with the German flag, confidently predicting victory for Germany against Scotland. 24 teams from across Europe will play in a total of 51 matches before the final in Berlin on July the 14th.